Good morning, all. Spring is on our doorstep in the lands of where ISCRR's various offices are, in the Wadawurrung, the Wurundjeri, and the Bunurong lands across the west, north, and southern peninsulas of Victoria. I've seen the golden wattle in full bloom and the kangaroo paw unfurling. I'd like to take the time to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land in which we work and live, and pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I'd also like to extend the acknowledgement to the traditional owners of the land in which you work and live. So feel free to make an acknowledgement in the chat, and I hope you're enjoying the turning of the season 2. Welcome to this session of ISCRR's Learning Series. My name is Dr. Kim Pham, Acting Co-Director at ISCRR, and I'd just like to let you all know, for those that are here today, that this session will be recorded and available to view on ISCRR's channel in the future. There's also an opportunity to post questions in the chat as we go, and there'll be a Q&A panel style session at the end. So welcome. Now, ISCRRR is a unique partnership between Monash University and WorkSafe Victoria, with the vision to improving the health and well-being of the Australian working population through research and applied evidence. Our topic today is empowering voices, lived experience in health and safety research design. And today we will explore how we humanize health in safety research and incorporate lived and living experience into the design of that research. I'll open today's panel by talking briefly about the inception of ISCRR's Lived and Living Experience Policy, followed by Professor Alex Collie from Monash University. He will give an overview of the Healthy Working Lives Research Group Workers' Voice Study. And then we have the pleasure of having Grainne Cruickshank, who is a lived experience advisor for the Healthy Working Lives Research Group. And Grainne will be interviewed by Dr. Elizabeth Pritchard to discuss why she gives her time as a lived experience advisor. You know, what specific things organisations need to be aware of, sort of the do's and do nots when engaging with people with lived experience from her personal view. And then we'll close with a bit of Q&A at the end. So feel free to post some questions in the chat as we go. There's been incredible interest in today's webinar, so I'd also like to acknowledge our valued listeners who have dialed in today, some of whom may have lived or living experience. So given the topic, you know, it can be challenging or triggering to listen to. So if you are feeling a little bit wobbly, feel free to pause, take a breath, or even leave. Now, ISCRRR engages in research and evaluation across various projects. You know, we design, we test, assess programs, pilots, interventions, you know, with a particular focus on workplace injury, mental health, and recovery from that injury. And quite naturally, in the type of work the Institute does, you know, we found ourselves engaging with individuals who do have lived and living experience. This has included at-risk workers like casual workers, injured workers, people with health conditions or impairments, minority groups, children and young people, as well as those that care for others, including service providers, unpaid carers, family members, and advocates. And I'd say it was probably a year ago when the inception of ISCRR's lived and living experience policy began, we recognised a significant gap in the Institute's articulation of how we engage and recognise the contributions of those with lived and living experience as they apply to our research and our institute activities. And we asked ourselves, what would those principles be? What would be our roles, our responsibilities? And we were very clear that we also wanted to recognise and include paid remuneration. So what would those frameworks that we would base them on? And then, following that, what could we develop some sort of practical procedural guide to help our staff navigate through those interactions? And 6 months in the making, in April 2024, ISCRR released the Institute's first lived and living experience policy, and it's the first of its kind at Monash, and is a representation of our values and our principles. Our copy is available on our website. And, in going through this journey, we did recognise that those with lived experience in other policy documents, referred to as consumers. But for those that have read our policy, we have chosen the term lived and living experience experts. And the reason why we refer to them in that way is because we really value the wealth and the information these people bring, and we consider them experts in their own experience. So, they may not be experts in all areas and may not have traditional expert qualifications, but we acknowledge their personal expertise in managing those personal obstacles and navigating external support providers and their perspectives in the areas of improvement from their own experience. And so the policy that ISCRR developed, went through external, internal and external consultation. We consulted across several Monash University institutes, compared other state regulatory policies in other sectors, engaged lived and living experience expert advisors, lived and living experience advocates, and we had some really rich conversations with the WorkSafe Victoria's lived experience stakeholder working group as well. So if you are one of those people who ISCRR consulted with in your listening and you're in the webinar today, I just really wanted to thank you for your valued contribution and the time you gave generously to ensure that the language in ISCRR's lived and living experience policy was inclusive, aligned and well defined. I will now hand over to Professor Alex Collie. Alex is the Director of the Healthy Working Lives Research Group and Co-Director of the Division of Health Services Systems and Policy at the School of Public Health and Preventative Medicine in Monash University. Yes, Alex, over to you. Could you tell us more about the Workers' Voice study?
Thanks, Kim. Yes, with great pleasure. I'll talk about this study, and thanks for that introduction and the background to your new policy on lived and living experience. Many of the sentiments and ideas you expressed really are so important and fundamental to this particular project that I'd like to talk briefly about today, to Workers' Voice. And I guess particularly I just wanted to give a shout out to anyone online who has had a workplace injury or disease, or had a family member or friend who's had one and who's had a workers' compensation claim. Those people were really the inspiration for the project that I'm going to talk about, and trying to run a research study that really enables and lifts those people's voices in thinking about how we design and manage workers' compensation in Australia. So I am going to share my screen just briefly and run you through just the background to the project, why we're doing it and where we're up to and what we aim to achieve, before handing over to the stars of the show today, Grainne and Elizabeth. So I hope everyone can see my screen now. So Workers' Voice is a project where what we're trying to do is reimagine workers' compensation in Australia from the point of view of people with lived experience. And we're doing this for a number of reasons. For decades now, we have observed through research and practice and many other avenues that many people find the workers' compensation process and being involved in workers' compensation quite stressful and confusing. And that can have, in some people, some quite significant impacts on their health, particularly people's mental health, and on their ability to get back to work. We have reams and reams of evidence and published studies and papers in Australia or internationally. That evidence is fairly convincing. We also know that good systems consider the views and experiences of system users. We don't just have to think about workers' compensation. We think about this in terms of any business or organisation, really. And there's been an enormous shift over the last 5 to 10 years, particularly in healthcare and health systems, in trying to take on board perspectives and views from the consumers or users of those systems. And I would say we've started to see that occurring in our workers' comp schemes around Australia as well, but maybe we're a bit behind some of those other parts of society that are taking these things more seriously. And so historically, when we see our workers' compensation schemes change, and they do change pretty often, as Victoria is experiencing at the moment, but as other states and territories experience pretty regularly, workers typically have not had a strong voice in reforming and design and the way we operate those workers' comp systems in Australia. So we put those things together and we thought, well, maybe there's an opportunity to think outside the box and think if we can develop a different sort of workers' compensation system that really reflects the views of people who have had a workers' comp claim and had a workplace injury or disease. And that's really the purpose of this project. So we have a couple of aims of the study. Just first of all, is to design a workers' comp system based on people's lived experiences. So when we say that, we mean people who have made a workers' compensation claim and their key informants, their family members, their close friends, their carers, those people around them who've supported them through that injury or disease and that claim process. And in doing that, to sort of create a vision for a kinder, fairer, better workers' comp system. We are doing that in sort of 3 main parts. The project, and I should say we're about a year into this project. It's a 3-year project funded by the Australian Research Council, which I'll talk about in a minute. The first part is really just to listen closely to people who have made workers' compensation claims, and we've run a number of activities over the last 12 months, including a big online survey. Elizabeth, who you'll hear from in a minute, has been interviewing lots of people from around the country who have had workers' compensation claims and their family members and friends. And we've been getting input from people with lived experience in a variety of other ways. We want to use that information to create a virtual model, a computer model of workers' compensation based on lived experience. That's the main output from this project, actually, is this computational virtual model. I'll explain that in a minute. And we're going to compare that lived experience model to a similar computer model of the current approach that we have to workers' compensation, which we're in the thick of building at the moment. We've actually made a lot of progress in building a computer simulation of how our current workers' comp systems function. And in doing that, what we'll be able to do is say, well, here's the current way we run workers' compensation in Australia, and here's how it might be different if we designed it differently or if we operated it differently based on the input we've heard from people with lived experience. And those people will be embedded in that model development process. One of our main activities for next year is actually to run a series of workshops with people who've had a workers' compensation claim to actually tease apart the model, pull it pieces, put it back together and make sure it reflects their experiences and their preferences moving forward. Along the way, we're hoping to promote study findings to the community and decision makers through forums like this, through our website, through other activities that we have underway. So you might be asking, what's a computer model, a computational model? It sounds a bit weird. The reason we're doing this is because we know it's going to be incredibly challenging and probably near impossible in the 3-year timeframe of this project for us to test a lived experience model in real life, because our workers' comp systems take a long time to change. It's a bit like turning the Titanic. But we can develop virtual versions of them using modern computational methods. And some of these sorts of figures and terms might be familiar to people, things like social network models, which just sort of describe the connections between people in a society. There are these approaches called system dynamics models, which are really sometimes called sort of spaghetti diagrams, where you sort of look at how processes and people and within an organization or within a society interact. And then we also have things called agent-based models, where you define some agents, which are people or organizations in a system, and you give them features like age and gender and preferences for things, and you put them into this virtual world and you let them interact, and you let the modeling tell you what the outcomes of that are. And so what we're using is a combination of these things. So what we're trying to do is create a virtual representation of a workers' compensation system. There's actually a combination of a system dynamics model with an agent-based model. And I won't go into the technical detail, partly because I'm not the technical expert on this. Our colleagues at the University of Melbourne are running this side of the project. But essentially that computer model is a workers' compensation system. It has structure, it has rules, it has processes, it has people and organizations, and they have features, and it has inputs and outputs. And so it's essentially a virtual model of a workers' compensation system. We hope to be able to show you that probably this year, maybe. We're very close to having the sort of beta version of that model put together. The team that's running this really importantly includes people with lived experience. So Grainne, who you'll hear from soon, has been involved from the very start, including helping to write our application to the Australian Research Council. Seems like a long time ago now. I think that was about 2.5 years ago. Grainne is part of the investigator team, along with the other investigators listed here, myself, Jason Thompson, Libby Callaway, and others, Elizabeth, who you'll hear from as well. And then we have a group of people who are lived experience advisors here on the screen, who've been helping us out with some really important parts of this project, not just as participants in research. They're playing really other roles as well, and helping us design some of the research and interpret what we're finding, and as part of the sort of organisation and governance of the project. So we're trying to embed as much as we possibly can the views and experiences of people within the project who have lived experience. Just briefly, I'd say the project is funded by the Australian Research Council. It's conducted by that team that I just showed you, and we're running it independently. And the reason I want to emphasise the independence is just so that because we know there are sometimes tensions, I guess, between people who have been involved in workers' comp systems from a participant's point of view, and the systems or the organisations that run those systems. So we're trying to encourage as much as we possibly can this independence of the project, so that people will feel comfortable participating and engaging with us from the university. If you want to know more, you can scan that QR code or just go directly to our website, workersvoice.com.au. We have a Facebook page. You can email us as well. There's a whole set of other things we're trying to do to sort of demystify workers' compensation during the course of this project. Most of that will be published on our website. Things like plain language statements, Q&As, and other things, because it is a very complex system. And one of the key bits of feedback we're getting from people as we speak to them is they find engaging with the system very challenging, and just finding simple information as being one of the first main barriers that they encounter when they make a workers' compensation claim. So we're also trying through this project to address some of those barriers as well. Look, that's it from me. Obviously, there's a lot of questions that have already been put through that we can answer later on, but I think, do I hand back to you now, Kim, and then over to start of the show?
Yes, thanks, Alex. Really great to hear the inspiration behind the worker's voice. And yeah, it does seem like a big project and challenge, incorporating lived experience, building a computer model, and balancing the viewpoints. So I'd be really keen to hear how that project plays out. It's really exciting. Thanks, Alex. And we'll then now move to our next two speakers. Grainne Cruickshank has extensive experience in supporting people with significant brain injury. She's currently a lived experience advisor on the Workers' Voice study that Alex had introduced, and she's a community representative to the Rehabilitation, Aging and Independent Living, otherwise known as RAIL, Research Centre at Monash University. Grainne will share her story with Elizabeth, who is a research fellow within the Healthy Working Lives Research Group, where she's led several qualitative studies. And she's currently working on the Workers' Voice project too. Both Grainne and Elizabeth will have a conversation, and it will bear insights of what it's like to be a living experience advisor, and the things organisations need to be aware of, and just some personal perspectives. I believe we're going to begin with some slides.
It's my absolute delight to sit here next to Grainne Cruickshank. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Alex, for going through the importance of listening to people and listening to those and involving those with lived experience and living experience in our projects going forward. So I've known Grainne for about 18 months in the project, not as long as Alex, as he said, Grainne has been involved from the beginning. That's why Grainne is also a lived experience investigator on the program, on the project as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about her experience on the way through, as Kim said, a conversation. So to start us off, Grainne, tell us a little bit about what's the best thing for you being involved as a lived experience advisor.
For me, it's to be able to help people, help others that are going through the process or similar things that Peter and I went through, to make it easier for others. It was such a hard time. I was so young. Pete was so young. He was in a coma for so long. To speak up for others and to show others, 'cause I've got the skills. I can speak up. I'm loud, and I'll get out there. And I've learnt that. So I want others to be able to do that. I want to help others to do that. It's very daunting becoming an advocate and going up against systems that I didn't even know anything of. I had no understanding of. And because I can at this stage in my life. I've got time.
That's awesome. And like Kim said before, you're also a lived experience advisor on other projects as well. Tell us about some of the things you're quite proud of around that.
I'm really proud of, I'm on the RAIL, Rehabilitation, Aging and Independent Living for Monash University. I'm an external on the external committee, and I'm an advisor on that. And that's wonderful. I've been on it for 4 years now, and I love it. The first meeting I went to, I cried because all the things that they were doing was going to add to people with disabilities' lives, and for all the ones who cared for them, they were going to help us do it better. You know, it was great. I've also been involved in making a resource for people ageing well with a traumatic brain injury, and I have loved that because I've been involved right from the start, all the way through. I've gone to all the meetings. Everything I've said, I've seen in print. It's just amazing to have that out there. I wish that was out there when Pete had his head injury. I didn't even know what a head injury was at the beginning. And to have all that information that you could just go and get and look at and work through is amazing. And I've been heard all the way through that.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. And being an investigator and a lived experience advisor on the Workers' Voice, what are some of the specific things that researchers or organisations need to be aware of when we're getting people involved in these types of roles?
this is just for me.
Yeah, from your perspective.
Yeah. I know that I doubt myself, and I've never been really sure. We've discussed this time and time. I've never been really sure of what I can offer. We may feel that we cannot speak up in front of, or we don't want to speak up in front of all the academic skills that are in the room. Like, I just sit back and think, you know, I've been given documents and I've come back to Elizabeth and said, am I checking typos as well? I can't tell you guys, you know, anyway, I didn't think I could, but I can, because I've got these skills that I don't always recognise. But I think other people are like that too. We second guess our own worth. And emotionally it can be really hard, and I will get upset. It's really hard to talk about Pete and what's happened, and so yeah, you have to be really aware of that. And plus, as you can see, this is totally out of my comfort zone. I'm here, but
She's doing a fantastic job. And so what can we do as researchers to help support you in being out of your comfort zone?
The do's and don'ts of working with lived experience people. Be very clear of what's being asked for in the role, like explain it, timelines with the work. I don't think at the beginning I realised that the work of study was going to be 4.5 years, but I kept going back to Alex and we worked it all out. Checking in with the lived experience while that person, whilst they're doing their work. You know, sometimes if I'm out there floundering, I get a bit scared, but yeah, it's good to check in and make sure that I'm on the right track. Don't assume that I know how to use, or that we know how to use technology like Zoom or Teams or chat. I learned how to work Teams on the fly one day at a meeting. And on our first face-to-face meeting, Elizabeth, I didn't know. I apologised to Elizabeth for not knowing how to do track changes. And Elizabeth showed me before I left that day, and I used it in our next piece of work. It was fine. Don't use jargon and acronyms without explaining what it means. At times, commenting on documents. I have my iPad open as well, and I'm looking up things. And one day I remember saying, I looked up IME, and of course that's the independent medical exam, but I didn't know that. But Peter went for so many of those in the early years. I should have known that one. Don't engage with lived experience person as a token gesture. It's, you know, we know. Don't talk over or interrupt us. I've seen that done, and then it made me sit back. I didn't want to join in. I just sat back and thought, well, it's not going to happen to me. Meet us face-to-face where possible. For example, for me to be comfortable with today, Elizabeth and I have had 2 meetings face-to-face, so thank you. Do create trust and do believe us. Do be aware of the emotional impact of lived experience. Recounting stories and memories. With some of the work I've been involved in, someone has rung me back to check I'm all right or to debrief. Include us in all conversations when we're in the room. Respect us as a person and our time. We're giving our time. I've never asked for money, but I'm giving my time to try and help. Have respectful conversations. I'm full of do's and don'ts, aren't I?
This is great. These are great. I'm writing them down because I'm going to reinforce them for everybody who's listening. This is fantastic.
In a recent Zoom, the other lived experience raised a hand, but it wasn't noticed. And the Pro-Vice Chancellor was in that Zoom, and he did notice, and he stopped his comment and went back to her. I thought that was fantastic that he would do that. You know, we were noticed. Be recognised in the group. In one of the committees that I'm on, if there's someone new in the room, we all introduce ourselves. I'm not very good at the blurb thing. I forget half the things, but it's really good. We learn a little bit about each other, and you know, sometimes you get into Zooms and there's people in that Zoom that don't know you, or even Grainne. My name looks different on the screen than how you pronounce it, and it's not straight away that, you know, a treating professional could be, oh, I know Grainne, I knew Grainne Cruickshank. ask them for their input. I remember the first Zoom I ever went on, I was asked to summarise the meeting. I'm like, oh my God, I can't do that. But I actually managed to do it. It was fine. I'm the sort of person that goes away and thinks and then comes back by email. If I can't think on the spot, and all of my roles have been fine with that. I've asked at the beginning and they've all said that's fine, and it's worked.
Fantastic. I'm going to let you catch your breath and I'm going to reiterate these if I may. Is that all right?
Yes.
Brilliant. Okay, so make sure that you give people a timeline. Check in with them regularly, and that came up a couple of times in what Grainne was just saying. Have the connection and don't assume. And we've had lots of conversations over the phone, over email, face-to-face. I will do whatever's necessary with people with lived and living experience, because that's what creates that value between what I know and what I don't know. Because what Grainne brings and what all of our lived experience advisors brings is information and experience that I don't have. Everyone is different. No jargon or acronyms. We're very good at using jargons and acronyms, people, in all our different workplaces, as well as academia. And don't do it as a token gesture. Don't do it as a tick in the box. Don't interrupt the person. Meet them face to face wherever possible. Create that trust. Believe that person. It is their experience. We cannot refute their reality. And if we do, we're not actually embracing the whole paradigm and ethos of working with people with lived and living experience. Be aware of the emotional impact. Often we check in after meetings and I go, how are you going, Grainne? Anything you want to ask on? Anything that you want to talk through, that sort of thing. It will take time, and the richness of what we can collect together is so important. Check in and debrief, include them, be respectful in time and conversations. Notice when somebody's trying to speak, allow them to speak up, be recognised, introduce yourselves every single time if there's new people in the room. Pronounce their names correctly, ask them how to do that, ask for input and allow time to think. That is just beautiful. So I'm wondering if you can also share that beautiful story about the impact of, when we talked about the other day, the impact of that person that you had in the beginning of his career and how the interactions that you and Peter had with him actually changed his life and what he does and what the work that he does now.
Yeah, when Pete passed away, I got a card in the mail from someone that had been in Peter's life, or Peter and my life, met us in a professional way about 15 years earlier. And the card was absolutely beautiful. And it said how much this person admired us and how much we had impacted that person's career and changed and made him grow. And I wouldn't have even thought that. I was like, I didn't know, but that person has since gone on to be, I think, upper management, but certainly management in one of the major funding bodies today. The person worked in a different organisation when we first met them, but we changed, Pete, probably we changed how he thought about things. And that was just so nice to read that. You don't even think that, you're just living your life, you're just going through. But somehow he took our life and it impacted his role and now his management. So it's wonderful to think that we did that and that he could see things in us that, you know. So when you're not just a number, because they know, they've seen, they've met, they've been in your home. Oh, it's nice. It was lovely.
That's fantastic. That's beautiful. And I think we need to not underestimate that power that it has to change us as well, as clinicians, as managers, as team leaders, as people in a project, whoever that is. When we actually connect with somebody with lived experience and really connect and listen, we have that, they have that ability to help us grow and develop as a person as well. And I think that's powerful. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that story.
No, it's all right.
Beautiful. And so what has been the most rewarding moment or moments for you so far in this work?
Many, many moments. Of course, being involved in Alex's Workers' Voice study, and knowing that what comes out of it can help so many. Peter was under the work cover system for 32 years, so living in systems. And like I've said, at times I wouldn't have done the surveys because those funding bodies paid for our life. They paid for Peter's medical help. So I wouldn't endanger any of that by commenting. But now I can. Now I can give my opinion on things, and now I'm being asked for my opinion on things. It's such a nice time in my life to have come from all that's happened. Being here today, even though it's totally out of my comfort zone, and the 18-month role, as I mentioned, with the ageing well with the traumatic brain injury, that's amazing. And I think that gets launched in September at the Brain Injury Conference. And I've invited myself. That has been wonderful. That's really my thing. It's just, if it had been around when he had his injury, as I said, and everyone in that project is just listened to and valued. It's been great seeing mine and the other lived experiences, words in print. It's just amazing. The RAIL, Rehabilitation Aged and Independent External Advisory Committee. We can't get it out. My first meeting with them, as I said, I cried. It was just amazing. And to see what they do now, and now I've been asked to be involved with the Friends of Rail, and I'm head friend. And I'm learning with that as well, but hopefully we're helping people that are still doing that role, are still caring for people, are still on the ground doing all the really hard yards, helping make life easier for them. In all my roles, I feel listened to. Here, all of the roles that I've had and I'm in now, and for me, knowing that all the really hard times that Peter and I went through, my experience can now be used to improve conditions for others.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. That is just so amazing to hear from you, Grainne. If there's one more thing that you would like us to know, what would that one thing be for people who are on this webinar today, from your experience and all of your roles as a lived experience advisor? What's the one most important thing that just leaps into your mind right now to leave us?
Anything leaps into my mind. I suppose to be asked for my opinion and to be listened to, and just to be valued for that opinion, to add it to everyone else's opinion is all that you can ask.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Grainne. And I'll hand back over to Kim for question time.
Yeah.
And we'll hear more from Grainne in a minute around questions.
Thank you, Grainne. Thank you, Elizabeth. Wow. The do's and don'ts, and what a great sharing experience. Grainne, I think you've done great. Well done. Thumbs up. I don't know. I only have two, but I wish I could do, yes, lots more. Yeah, it does take courage to share that journey, you know, being asked, being listened to, being valued. Yeah, I love your comments on having respectful language, creating trust, you know, being aware that can be triggering, having the appropriate recognition. So it's been a really insightful journey, and learning about your contributions and learning about the impact that it's had on your life, but also others, and how it's impacted on their career decisions as well. So that's been a really wonderful thing to learn. What power you have with the impact and the work that you've done. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing your story. I will then open to our Q&A panel, where Grainne, Elizabeth, Alex, or I can take questions. I might start off with some of the interesting questions we received from registrants that came through on the webinar. I might rephrase a couple to capture the theme of those questions. All right, let's launch into the first one. I think the first one I think is more about ethically engaging those with lived experience. So this might be a question for Elizabeth and Grainne to comment on. And it's sort of in two parts. And what's the best way to make contact with people who would be experienced in providing their lived experience to a certain project from your perspective? Elizabeth, Grainne, did you want to comment? And then there's a second part to that question.
Sure. I'm involved with all the roles I do because of the professionals that worked with Peter. After Peter passed away, Libby Calloway asked if I'd be interested in doing some voluntary work. But the training teams, health professionals, all have contacts in their own organisations. I see positions and roles advertised in organisations that I'm a member of. So, yeah, I imagine for me, that's how I would, how they know.
Yes.
They're on the ground there, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's important to think about this in sort of two ways. That it's a conversation, you're having a connection, you're building a partnership with you and the person. And so they can always say no, like Grainne said, that, you know, she can always say no. And we always set it up so that she can actually go, no, I'm not doing that, but I'm doing this bit, or can I just do this bit and not that bit? So I think that's really important too, around that sort of whole ethical sort of connection of what we do and how we do it. For us in Workers' Voice, we've connected with support groups. We've had public webinars out there to talk about the project. Alex has done a number of those. I've done a couple of those at conferences as well. And through that, people have shown that they're interested in becoming lived experience advisors. We have a process that we go through so that we know what, you know, we're doing. The lived experience advisor is aware of what might be expected. We have this understanding of remuneration. We have an understanding that the person can actually withdraw and cease at any time. And so we're respectful around that. But we have this understanding and that connection of this is what we need. Is that possible for you? We can tailor it, we can shift it, we can do it differently. So I think those things are important to think about with your own contacts, the people around you, and the person always has that opportunity to say, no, I don't want to be involved anymore.
Oh, then that might relate to the second part of the question, Elizabeth and Grainne. What is it then about someone's lived experience that makes them qualified to be part of a project, say in the Workers' Voice context?
For me, Peter had a severe traumatic brain injury for 32 years, so I think that I'm really qualified. Traumatic brain injury encompasses so much. So we were trying to navigate our way through all that entail, and then advocating for Peter with funding bodies and insurance companies. I think it would be like any other role, meet the person and listen to their story, their life experience. If you like, interview the lived experience advisor. I've told everywhere that I'm involved in, if at any stage I don't meet expectations or someone better suited comes along, I'm fine for that. Just tell me. Because you want the best person in the role. That's how it is.
Wonderful. The second question, thank you, Elizabeth and Grainne. This was received from a registrant. This might be more of a, this question comes about talking about how you balance the perspectives of lived experience and expectations and costs to the scheme. So it might be more of an Alex question. I'm assuming you probably have a very strong opinion in this respect, and that is there seems to be a recurring cycle between cost overruns and then stakeholder dissatisfaction to the system, and addressing lived experiences, you know, can often lead to increased costs as we try to meet those expectations. Questions: how can this cycle be broken? Should the focus shift to identifying and defunding low-value treatments at a policy level, rather than addressing individual cases to manage expectations using scientific evidence and outcome data. So bit of a there's a multi-layer there, but access. Alex, can you comment on balancing perspectives and costs to the schemes?
Yeah, of course. There's a few questions in there. I'll try to tease them apart a little bit, but I guess my immediate response to that is that I agree. I mean, we do see that pendulum shifting a lot in the way that we run workers' compensation in Australia. And my personal view is that's partly, or maybe even largely, a consequence of the way we measure the performance of these systems. And probably don't have time to go into the detail in that at the moment, but we measure them in ways that magnify the impact of things that can be over long periods of time that may not be that consequential over those periods of time. But we see this pendulum shifting. So again, we're seeing in Victoria at the moment where the legislation's been reformed, it's gone through Parliament, restricting access to the scheme for people with mental health claims, and also putting in sort of a gateway at the end, 2.5 years, to make it harder for some people to get through there. We've seen that in many other states and territories in response to financial circumstances, sometimes in response to other things, but it's usually finances that drive it. And then, this pendulum swings back the other way. That is one of the reasons for running this study. What we're hoping to do is sort of provide a view that really breaks through that cycle and reimagine the design and the operation of workers' comp systems. If you look at, and we've sort of documented a lot of these scheme reforms in Australia over the last decade, there's very little input from people who have made claims, who have had injuries in many of those things. They're very political and high processes, those scheme reforms. So, I guess my initial response to that is, it's one reason for trying to develop a different vision, which is what we're doing in this Workers' Voice project, and doing that through the perspective of lived experience. Who knows what we'll find? One of the really exciting parts of this project is we don't know what these models are going to look like yet. They might be just minor variations of what we have at the moment, or they might be completely different approaches, and we don't know because we haven't really asked this question before, I don't think. I think the other part of the question was about what we're sort of starting to call, I think, value-based healthcare in these systems. And that's actually another major theme of the research that we do at the Healthy Working Lives group, looking at quality of healthcare that's provided through workers' comp and other systems to people with injuries and diseases. And there's huge potential to do things like not fund low-value treatments or not fund potentially harmful treatments. We see a surprising amount of that occurring, and one of the challenges that I think that scheme funders and regulators and insurers have is actually having measurements in place that allow them to identify when funding is being provided for things that are potentially harmful or low value. So that's another tranche of what we're working on, and absolutely we should not be paying for things that aren't working or that are likely to harm someone. But I don't think you need to do that in a way that's it shouldn't be the only thing we're doing. It's an important activity, but we should also be thinking about the way the systems are run and designed.
Thank you, Alex. Yes, it's a big problem to pick apart, and like you mentioned, the pendulum swings one way, and we go in cycles. So, yes, kudos to the Workers' Voice in trying to create a model to break this cycle. I'm noting the time, so I think the next question will probably be our last question for today's webinar, and it's from the perspectives of funding research. So how can funding for research recognise the value of involving people with lived experience, involving them in a meaningful way in this process. I'm just wondering whether we could go to yourself, Elizabeth, Alex, and Grainne, if you have any comments on that.
I think it's important to recognise that this is the way that research is becoming more valuable and more rich in what it does, because we can't create things and do things when we're sitting outside of the people with lived experience. And I think it's important to note that Australia is coming more to this way, which is fantastic. And other countries, as Alex mentioned before, particularly places like the UK, you can't put an application for any funding anywhere, public or private, without having a person with lived experience involved from the conception of thought right through to the creation, right through to the end evaluation as well. So I think that's important to think about. And I know that at the end of the answer, Grainne also has just a final comment that she'd like to say as well, Kim, after Alex has mentioned anything about the funding.
Just to follow on from your point, Elizabeth, it is becoming a feature of the way that research funding functions in this country. So organisations like National Health and Medical Research Council now have policies about engagement, consumer and community engagement in research, and are really encouraging it. And we need to recognise the expertise of people with lived experience in whatever sort of project we're running as being equivalent to the expertise of the scientists or researchers, sometimes more important than that as well. And so that not just recognise that in a sort of conceptual way, but in a meaningful way as well, by funding the involvement of those people in research. That's just increasingly the way that these things are going, which is a positive move, I think.
Thank you, Elizabeth and Alex. Grainne.
Hi. I suppose for me, we are all giving advice, all of the academics, all of the professionals, and need to be listened to, all of us, and valued. If I've lived it, then I can only tell how it was for me. It may not be everyone's experience or opinion or knowledge, but the study is then armed with all the perspectives. All of us make the decisions and all of us have input into everything, and we're all valued. That would be great.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for the fist bump. I love that. Thank you, Grainne. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you for the panel today. We are wrapping up our webinar. If you do have any questions or comments that for the webinar, please include them in the satisfaction survey that will appear in your browser. And if you have any questions that haven't been answered, feel free to put them on at info@isccr.com.au. We will have a copy of this presentation to view on ISCCR's website in the coming week, and we will continue to run webinars like this on a range of topics throughout the year. So if you do have a topic of interest, please reach out to us again at info@isccr.com.au. Again, thank you to our listeners. Thank you to our panel today, and thank you all for joining us. I hope you have a great day.